Tourism in Las Vegas is in a big slump this summer, costing the city billions of dollars. Some are saying that could signal trouble ahead for the U.S. economy.
This summer in Las Vegas tells a story that reaches far beyond the bright lights of the Strip. Crowds are smaller, hotel workers are bringing home half the tips they earned last year, and even simple purchases like a drink now leave visitors with sticker shock. The city reported an 11% drop in total visitors in June, according to local officials. For an economy that depends on constant traffic from tourists, that decline means billions of dollars lost. At the heart of this downturn lies a question that is echoing across America. Are President Donald Trump's tariffs and tougher border rules slowly choking the life out of U.S. tourism? The administration has leaned heavily on tariffs as a show of economic power. But those policies, along with stricter immigration enforcement, are now colliding with one of America's most visible industries.
Is Las Vegas dying, or is it all hype?
It is dying. Not only with the tourism, but with the pricing. The consumer looks at it and says, man, I'm paying this much for this. I just don't see the value.
Las Vegas has become the clearest warning sign. The mayor has confirmed that the number of Canadian visitors flying into the city has collapsed by 40% so far this year. For a market that once supplied a steady stream of guests, the faucet has indeed slowed to a drip. That drop alone helps explain why casinos, restaurants, and shops are all feeling the squeeze. The pain shows up in everyday paychecks. Restaurant workers who used to earn between $150 and $200 a day in tips now see only $50 to $60. Tourists are still spending, but the crowds are thinner, and higher prices on hotels, meals, and drinks make people think twice about returning. Experts in Nevada are warning that Las Vegas cannot simply charge more to make up the difference. A city that built its reputation on offering value is losing the very appeal that made it unique.
I think since 2006, the number of people coming from the U.S. to Canada is more than the number of people crossing from Canada into the U.S.
The contrast becomes clearer when looking at what is happening across the border. Canada has faced the same tensions, with its citizens cutting back on trips south. Customs and Border Protection data shows 2.4 million land entries from Canada into the United States in July 2025. That was 500,000 fewer than the same month last year. The decline has been sharp enough to hurt duty-free shops along the border. The Frontier Duty-Free Association reports sales in July were still down nearly 37%. One store in New Brunswick even closed its doors after more than 40 years of business. Yet Canada itself is not standing still. For the first time since 2006, outside of the pandemic years, more Americans traveled north than Canadians traveled south. Statistics Canada confirms that in June and July, cross-border flows tilted in Canada's favor. Families, baseball fans, and summer travelers increasingly chose Canadian cities as their destination. Even with some struggles at border towns, Canada has managed to present itself as a stable and welcoming option. In this climate, Prime Minister Mark Carney's message of patience and openness is resonating not just with trade partners, but also with ordinary travelers. The lesson is clear. President Trump's tariffs were meant to project strength, yet their ripple effects are hurting American tourism. From the Strip in Las Vegas to border duty-free shops, the sector is losing visitors, especially Canadians who once came in steady numbers. At the same time, Canada is quietly turning the tide. More Americans are crossing north, and Canada's image as stable and welcoming is paying off. While Trump's approach makes the U.S. look less attractive, Canada gains simply by holding steady. In this contest, resilience is proving stronger than force. The real question is whether America can afford to keep driving travelers away while its neighbor turns caution into opportunity.
Well, let's talk about this extended truce between China and the U.S. that was announced by President Trump.
I think that President Trump didn't have much of a choice because China is in a very strong position to negotiate.
If China is operating from a power position, what about Canada?
In early August, two very different trade stories unfolded. In Washington, President Donald Trump announced a 90-day extension of the U.S.-China tariff truce. The White House framed it as a way to buy time and secure new commitments on U.S. chip exports and energy sales to China. Beijing, for its part, still controls most of the world's rare earth production and had just opened new zero-tariff access to dozens of African nations, strengthening its own negotiating position. But while Trump eased tensions with Beijing, the pressure on Canada stayed intact. Since August 1st, Canadian goods that don't qualify under USMCA rules have faced a 35% U.S. tariff, a rate raised from 25% in late July. There's no sign yet of a reduction, and Ottawa has received none of the temporary tariff delays that Mexico secured. The contrast is clear. One neighbor gets more time, the other gets more heat. For Trump, tariffs are more than an economic measure. They're a negotiating lever. The official justifications change frequently. Border security, fentanyl, dairy, even unrelated sectors like banking. With China, the 90-day truce was tied to specific exchanges. More U.S. chips from companies like NVIDIA, more American ethane for Chinese industry, and the understanding that Beijing's dominance in critical minerals gives it leverage. With Canada, the calculus is different. Keeping tariffs high maintains pressure ahead of a possible early USMCA reopening. It limits Ottawa's breathing space and forces Canadian negotiators to consider concessions to avoid further escalation. Trump's track record with other partners, from the EU's capped 15% rates to Switzerland's 39%, shows how he uses these numbers to anchor hard bargaining.
We are in a difficult position with the U.S. We're subject now to a tariff of 35%. We have to put in place a very elaborate plan to diversify our exports.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has avoided rushing into retaliatory moves, opting for a mix of steady dialogue and visible domestic reinforcement. In July, Ottawa announced over $1 billion Canadian dollars in measures to protect the steel sector, including procurement rules favoring Canadian steel and aluminum, funding to reskill affected workers, and infrastructure investments to stabilize supply. These supports aim to absorb some of the market shock from the U.S. tariffs, which since June 4th have been as high as 50% on U.S. imports of Canadian steel and aluminum. According to the Canadian Steel Producers Association, about 6 to 6.5 million tons of steel lost access to the U.S. market after those measures. The domestic plan opens a 2 to 2.5 million ton opportunity for Canadian producers, a first step in restructuring away from over-reliance on U.S. buyers.
Europe is an obvious partner. It has a very mature economy. They're interested in all kinds of goods that we can export.
But we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the U.S. one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
At the same time, Canada is deepening ties with the European Union. Under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, most goods already trade tariff-free, but new talks are focusing on aligning industrial strategy in sectors like steel, aluminum, and critical minerals. With a market of roughly 450 million people and stable regulatory rules, the EU offers a reliable alternative that reduces Canada's exposure to U.S. tariff swings. Trump's strategy is built on speed. Apply tariffs, create immediate discomfort, and extract concessions quickly. Carney's counter is built on endurance. Reinforce domestic industries, diversify export markets, and keep diplomatic channels open until the balance shifts. While over 85% of Canada's exports to the U.S. still move tariff-free under USMCA rules, Ottawa holds cards that are hard for Washington to replace: strategic minerals, integrated auto supply chains, and substantial oil and gas flows. By protecting these advantages and expanding reliable partnerships like the EU, Canada aims to make sure it can withstand U.S. tariff pressure longer than Trump expects. The fight isn't just over rates and exemptions. It's about shaping the trade rules that will define North America for the next decade. And on that front, Canada is determined not to play from behind.
Knee, do not bend the knee. And we have a lot to fight for because we have a lot to offer. We're not some junior partner in this relationship that doesn't have a lot to offer.
Look, Canada's strong. We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away.
At a time when many expected Canada to lash out or fold under pressure, the country is doing something else entirely. It's not reacting emotionally. It's rebuilding deliberately. Just days after President Trump imposed a 35% tariff on Canadian goods not covered by CUSMA, Prime Minister Mark Carney made it clear. There would be no tit-for-tat escalation, no short-term theatrics. Instead, Canada is focusing inward, realigning its economy, strengthening domestic supply chains, and preparing for a future less dependent on the United States. This isn't just rhetoric. From Vancouver to Ottawa, the Carney government is channeling public frustration into long-term investment, rebuilding infrastructure, expanding value-added sectors, and exploring new trade corridors. It's not a loud response, but it's a determined one.
This is about building up bilateral trade relations between Canada and Mexico at a time when they're facing some pretty significant turbulence from here in Washington. The Trump administration has been talking about striking trade deals with all of its trade partners.
While Canada looks inward, it's also looking south. This week, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Foreign Minister Anita Anand are traveling to Mexico City for high-level talks with President Claudia Sheinbaum. The goal is simple: deepen bilateral cooperation. But the timing says more. Both Canada and Mexico missed Trump's August 1st deadline for new bilateral trade deals. Mexico received a 90-day reprieve. Canada did not. That difference is telling, but it hasn't derailed Canada's broader strategy. Mexico and Canada now find themselves on parallel tracks, each navigating the same unpredictable U.S. administration. In 2024, tensions flared when some Canadian leaders proposed cutting Mexico out of USMCA to seek a better deal with the U.S. That move frustrated Mexico, but today, both countries are facing a common challenge. And they're responding not with resentment, but with coordination. What's unfolding in Mexico City this week isn't just about trade. It's about repairing a key relationship and quietly shifting the balance of North American diplomacy. And all of this fits into a broader strategy from Carney, one that avoids reacting to volatility with more volatility. Instead of playing Trump's game of pressure and deadlines, Carney's response has been deeply structural. His approach is rooted in long-term positioning. Rather than seeking temporary tariff relief or concessions, Canada is investing in internal capacity through infrastructure projects, value chain localization, and trade diversification. Carney's message has been consistent. Canada cannot build a resilient economy if it relies on the whims of another country's politics. That message resonates far beyond economics. It speaks to sovereignty, stability, and national direction.
And there is no way that Canada should step down and say, okay, we're willing to take a second-rate deal for the next 3.5 years. That would be unfair to Canadians. That would be unfair to our economy.
This position is not just held at the top. On the ground, local leaders in Canada's most affected regions are echoing the same sentiment. In Windsor, Ontario, home to Canada's auto manufacturing hub, Mayor Drew Dilkens has spoken out against accepting a second-rate deal just to placate Washington. The economic cost is real. In recent weeks, major manufacturers like Stellantis have reported billion-dollar losses, and the added uncertainty from fluctuating tariffs is stalling investment. But the pushback from industry and government hasn't been desperation. It's been resolve. Canada remains at the negotiating table. But it's no longer negotiating from a place of urgency. It's negotiating from a place of strategy. So while Trump tightens the grip, Carney is building bridges, carefully, patiently, and beyond the usual channels. The partnership with Mexico is just one lane in a broader network Canada is rebuilding. It's a move not of isolation, but of insulation, guarding the country against external shocks and asserting its position as an equal in any negotiation. This isn't about Canada resisting for resistance' sake. It's about crafting a different kind of leadership, one that doesn't depend on appeasing the loudest voice, but on making the smartest long-term moves. And in that sense, the real story isn't just about tariffs. It's about who gets to define the rules in the next era of North American trade.